I'm Mimi Tang. I'm a physician scientist. I've trained as a doctor and also then completed a PhD and have pursued scientific research. So I've been practicing in clinical medicine and doing research for over 25 years now.
So you arrived in Australia when you were 7?
7.5.
7.5. So essentially your entire education has been here?
Yes.
How important is your ethnicity to you?
I would say it's an intrinsic part of my being. So, having been raised by Asian parents, I have a very strong sense of identity with Asian values and priorities, but also having grown up in an Australian setting from the age of 7.5, I think that my communication style, my interactions with others is very Australian, and indeed some of my opinions are quite Australian as well. So there is this constant battle. Actually, I can remember sometimes disagreeing quite strongly with my parents, who are obviously very Asian still in their thinking, although we have as a family, all of us, assimilated very nicely into the Australian community.
Was that a process for you, particularly given your parents and the house you grew up in? Was that a process for you, getting to a point where your communication was more Australian?
Yes, absolutely. I would say it took decades. So, through school, I can remember being a very quiet individual, very shy. Lots of things going on in my head. It wasn't just, blankness in there, but you might have thought there was just nothing happening because I was extremely quiet. It wasn't really until I had already completed my medical degree, specialised as an allergist and immunologist, and was doing my PhD thesis that I really, I think, understood the transition that I needed to make in order to progress in my career. And I was very fortunate to have a PhD supervisor, Professor Andrew Kemp, AM, who has really made the biggest difference to me.
In what way? Was it to be less Asian and more Australian? Is that putting it too bluntly?
No, I don't think it's too blunt. I think that the way that I had been used to communicating and interacting with others through my childhood and university years may be a combination of both my cultural heritage and upbringing, but also my own personality. I think it is true that Southeast Asian culture has a very strong grounding in Confucius thinking. And so there is this very great emphasis on respect, on harmony, and not offending. Also ensuring to maintain face, I think is the right word for it, and avoiding shame. So you have all of those elements in there, which mean when you communicate with people, at least for myself, I can really only speak from my own personal perspective, but it would take a very long time for me to sort through in my own mind what my thoughts were and how I would then choose to articulate those thoughts. And all of that took a great deal of active thinking before I got to the point of speaking.
How does that sit in an Australian context? All those values that you have to take into account, did it hold you back? I mean, clearly it hasn't, but how did it affect your professional journey?
I think it didn't hold me back because at the time I was learning these new skills, I was still in school, university, where a lot of your achievement is measured against examinations or even oral examinations where you're asked a specific question and you either know the answer or you don't and you deliver it. I think it becomes more important, your communication style and your ability to interact with others in a more active and assertive way becomes more important as your career progresses. Having learned to let my guard down a bit and join conversations earlier and share my thinking earlier was a very beneficial thing for me.
Is that your advice to young Asian Australians?
My advice to young Asian Australians is to acknowledge that there is a tendency for us to want perfection before we speak and to maybe find a mentor who can help them develop a different style of communication. It's not to change the way that they are, not to change their values, not to change their thinking, but to change or to learn and develop a different style of communication and interaction with others, whereupon you are able to join a conversation a little bit earlier.
What would you say to those who say, I don't want to change at all? You've made it really clear you're not changing yourself, you're not changing your values, you're changing your communication style. What would you say to people who say, why should I put myself forward more, be more assertive?
I would say that anyone who doesn't wish to change is placing their own barrier up for themselves in terms of self-awareness. We know that for any individual to be good at leadership is to identify your own blind spots and to embrace opportunities to improve yourself. And I think communication is central to success. There is also another aspect to this, which is the reality is we are in a westernized country, and the majority of individuals in this country communicate with a certain style. And so if you want to be involved and have a voice, you have to learn to express yourself and articulate yourself in a way that will gain traction. I would say, as a general guide to new Australians, is I think assimilation's great. Assimilation doesn't mean leaving behind your heritage. It means finding a way to live together in harmony, being able to bring your diverse attitudes, ways of thinking and behaviours into the mix, but also perhaps embracing those differences from the community as well.